This is Steve Dupuie for the Bible News Prophecy Program with Dr. Bob Thiel. Dr. Thiel, today I want to discuss the ramifications of a world without cash, or fiat currency, as some would put it, and how such a situation might impact society and fulfill biblical prophecies. An article at the freewestmedia.com website speaks about a law requiring all shops in Belgium to accept credit cards. Can you discuss the possible effects of this law?
Certainly. We're seeing in different parts of Europe, and not just in Belgium, moves toward having a cashless society. And what's interesting about Belgium is that 3/4 of the Belgians are against having bans on cash. They like to use cash. They don't want to do this. But the government, according to that article, says they haven't backed down, and it says they require small shops now to actually take credit cards. And the official argument is supposedly this is going to fight against fraud and money laundering. Well, as a small business owner in the past, of course, I was not doing that in Europe. There's no fraud about taking cash. I mean, you could get counterfeit bills, but that almost never happens. So that doesn't sound like the real reason. Basically, they seem to be wanting to do this so they can have control. And with electronic payments, they know what you're buying and what you're not buying, and so they can monitor it. And that's consistent with some biblical prophecies as well, that's going to happen.
Okay, now Jim Rickards, switching over to the United States, an American businessman, Jim Rickards, had mentioned one difference between cryptocurrencies and central bank digital currencies is that CBDCs do not use blockchain technology. Why is this significant?
Well, it's significant because of how blockchain has tended to work. Is it's not as subject to as much monitoring. People have been able to use blockchain more privately. Now, I'm not convinced that there won't be a way to monitor that in the future, but that's not the way what the central banks are doing. They're doing it in a way they can collect data, they can monitor things, and they'll know what's going on. They'll know what you're buying and selling.
So what is the motive then behind a country implementing a central bank digital currency?
Well, there's a tendency in human nature for those who end up with power to want more of it. And we're seeing in Europe, United States, so-called liberal democracies wanting to know everything they can about their citizens. And one of the ways to do this is to have everybody use some type of electronic form of payment. You know, in the old days, and even now, you and I could meet. Matter of fact, you and I have met many times privately. I could give you some cash or something. You could give me something, and nobody knows it but us. But if it's electronic and we meet together, and I've got one of these little machine thing type things. This isn't actually one, but they look kind of like this. Put your card in, then they can be monitored by the government. So that's part of it. Part of it's also, once you're being monitored, people will change their behavior. So maybe they'll encourage you to change your diet, change your drinking habits, change your exercise habits, see what political parties you support, what church you support, what magazines you might subscribe to, etc. So it gives them a huge way to categorize people with all this data.
So if that's the case, why couldn't people continue to use, let's say, silver and gold coins as a medium of exchange?
Well, they could. The problem is twofold. One, sometimes governments have confiscated that. This happened in the United States, by the way. Furthermore, the other issue is, like what happened in the United States, it was illegal to use gold. The United States government basically said only the government could have gold. People could use it for like wedding rings or historically old coins for coin collectors, but they weren't allowed to use it. And so that would be a factor. Now, that being said, the Bible actually does say that the beast power, the king of the north will rise up, will value gold, but we don't know if it's just because the digital currency, which they'll have will be backed up somewhat by gold as opposed to people using it. I mean, there still probably will be some people who would use a few coins every now and then, but the penalty probably would be so large in particularly Europe once the beast takes over that it would be very rare somebody would want to take those risks, or it'd have to be under some extreme circumstances.
Okay, you talked quite a bit about the beast, and I'm not going to address that right now, but that is very curious to me that you mentioned the beast using these digital currencies. But right now, some years ago, you wrote that you did not believe the USA would go to a digital currency during the first term of a Donald Trump presidency. That has been the case. Do you have any idea now how close the USA may be to adopting a digital currency from the central bank?
We're a lot closer. We're a lot closer now. Okay. Again, when I was looking at it back then, I also, by the way, said at that same time that gold would hit a record, and it did during the Trump presidency. Come down since then, but it actually did. But no, I was looking at certain world events and concluded that the U.S. wasn't ready for that yet. It's basically been proposed under the Biden administration, and even if, let's say, Donald Trump comes back in office, it could happen then. We're getting closer and closer. Particularly, the United States is concerned that because of its weaponization of using its dollar, that it needs other platforms to get more control. So at this stage, now I think it's more likely. I don't know when, but I do think it's likely. And we know over in Europe that they're taking a look at that. And, you mentioned Jim Rickards. And he put an article out a couple of days ago saying that, there's basically a war on cash. And this looks like 1984 because they can monitor what you're doing. You've got government surveillance. And that he believed that the central bank system with the digital currencies would be essentially what George Orwell warned about back in the 1940s would happen in 1984. Of course, that didn't happen in 1984. But in 2022, we certainly have the technical ability to do stuff that was not done before. And now with so much use going toward cashlessness, not using cash, and that's a big deal. I mentioned other countries. Several years back, my wife and I went over to Sweden, and we went into a museum, and they didn't take cash. They had this poster up that said they dreamed or they had a vision of a cashless society, like this was a great thing. We went to what we call in the United States a farmer's market when we were over in Sweden. And in the farmer's markets, usually you give a couple dollars here, it's cash. Oh no, everybody there had these little kind of devices that you could put in your card, some kind of card reader, and they could do that. And people think this is great, but it's actually consistent with various biblical prophecies.
So how would a government go about forcing its population to use a CBDC?
Well, to use digital currencies is pretty simple. There's a couple of simple ways to do it. The easiest way, perhaps, would be to quit printing money. Okay, if there is no other money, if they quit printing it, you can keep using notes, but every time they go into a bank, the bank could take them. The coins would last, but the coins, because of inflation, wouldn't be worth so much in time. Because the highest coins they have in Europe, for example, are the €2 coins, and with inflation, it wouldn't be worth so much. The other is simply to make it illegal. They started a step of that actually in Europe a while back. They used to have a €500 note. Okay, that was their biggest currency, and that note, and that actually got people interested who wanted to store a lot of cash in a small amount because that was worth roughly $600 at the time, U.S. dollars. So it's a lot less if somebody had a lot of money, but they basically phased those out a few years ago. So that was a step. In the United States, they don't have anything larger than $100 bills anymore, where they used to make notes for like $10,000, and we're talking like 30, 50 years ago, they had these big notes, maybe 100,000. I don't remember how high they went, but they don't do that anymore. So as we have inflation and our notes aren't worth as much, if they take away the bigger notes, that's another way, because it's inconvenient to use a lot of pennies, let's say, to pay for something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's 2,000 pennies for $20 in the United States. So, but the others is simply make it illegal.
Okay.
And so probably would be a combination of reducing the notes in circulation, as well as to make it illegal, and to claim they're doing this to fight terrorism, to stop fraud, supposedly, tax evasion, or whatever. And because the narrative that's been pushed in the US and Europe is there are all these big tax cheats, and the way we can get around this is by not having cash, because they bypass things. And criminals use cash is their argument. Of course, most people who use cash aren't criminals, but those are all part of the arguments that'll probably be used, and that's what they'll probably do.
Okay. Even though you touched on it during the course of this interview, we've got about 3 minutes left, and I wonder if you could dedicate that time to the prophecies that might be fulfilled when a CBDC or some similar type of control is fully implemented.
Yes, in the book of Revelation, we read about a beast rising out of the sea in Revelation chapter 3, first couple of verses. And the sea, by the way, is the Mediterranean Sea. So this is a European power. Well, in Revelation chapter 13, I'll just start reading in verse 16. It's talking about the beast power and the Antichrist here. It says, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads. Verse 17. And that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it's the number of a man. His number is 666. So what this is saying is they're going to be able to monitor all buying and selling. Well, you couldn't do that when Jesus told the Apostle John to pen this 1900 or so years ago, but you can do it now. So what we're saying here is there's going to be some kind of electronic currency here, and in order to use it, you have to have the mark of the beast in order to do this, and that will get people to go along with this beast power, which I mentioned before. So first, they're going to getting rid of cash slowly as more digital currencies are used. People are getting used to electronic payments, but eventually they're going to say, you can't do it unless. And this is what the Bible says is going to happen. And again, when the Apostle John was inspired to write this, it was impossible to control buying and selling, but it's not anymore. And again, we're seeing the mechanisms in place. Sweden is almost totally cashless. Some of the other countries are. Places like Belgium don't really want to go there, but they're being pushed along. And Europe's even got what I call a 666 enforcer. They set up the European Public Prosecutor's Office last summer to allow them to work on financial crimes. So they've got things getting set up for the beast to rise up and them to be able to monitor and, again, to go toward cashlessness.
Thank you, Dr. Thiel. Well, friends, that's about all the time we have for today's program. For more prophetic interviews with Dr. Bob Thiel, please visit our website at BibleNewsProphecy.net. This is Steve Dupuie with the Bible News Prophecy Program.